The cold reaches Cloud before the ground does. It isn't like Midgar cold, the recycled plate shadow chill that clings to your collar and never really bites. This is a different animal entirely, a cold that seems to come from underneath the world instead of around it, climbing up through his boots as he falls, and keeps falling through a sky that isn't the one he fell out of a heartbeat ago. There had been fire. He remembers fire, and Sephiroth's blade catching purple light, and the reactor groaning like something ancient waking up wrong. There had been Aerith's voice cutting through the noise. Not a scream, never a scream, just her voice, calm in the way that always meant she'd already made peace with something the rest of them hadn't caught up to yet. And then the world had torn. Not metaphorically. Cloud has seen the life stream do strange things, has been strange things, has died and not stayed dead, has watched a green river of souls answer prayers it had no obligation to answer. But he has never seen it do this, peel back like skin, like the seam of reality had been sewn crooked from the start, and something enormous had finally yanked the thread. He falls through the tear and out the other side into a black sky full of wrong stars. "Cloud!" Tifa's voice, close, off to his left. He twists his body mid-air, finds her, falling too, hair whipping straight up above her like a flame reversed. One arm out, reaching for nothing, because there's nothing to grab. Below her, further down, Barret is roaring something that might be words, or might just be Barret being Barret in freefall, his gun arm spinning uselessly, cycling through targeting protocols against a sky with no targets. And Aerith. Aerith is the only one of them not thrashing. She falls with her braid trailing straight up, green eyes wide open, and there is an expression on her face that Cloud has seen exactly twice before. Once in the church, once in the forest outside Calm, the look of someone listening to something the rest of them can't hear. "It's not angry," she says, and her voice carries somehow clean through screaming wind. "Whatever this place is, it's not angry at us." That is not, Cloud thinks, remotely useful information 40 feet above what is very clearly the ground. The ground announces itself with white. Not snow, or not only snow. A field of frost-crusted rock and hard-packed ice stretching toward a horizon lit an impossible cold blue, and rising out of that horizon, so tall it doesn't seem to obey the same rules gravity applies to everything else. A city. Towers of white and silver stacked and stitched together with threads of light, floating, actually floating, chunks of architecture hanging in open air with nothing beneath them, like Midgar's plate had been shattered, sterilized, and reassembled by someone with an entirely different idea of what a city should be. Cloud doesn't have time to appreciate the view. The ground is coming up fast, and his body, trained by years of falling off things that should have killed him, does the only sensible thing. He flips, plants the Buster Swords flat side down, and rides the impact into a bone-jarring skid that tears a furrow through frost and gravel for a good 15 feet before he stops, sword first, breathing hard, alive. Tifa lands like a cat 3 feet to his right, knees bent, one hand skimming the ground for balance before she's upright again, fists already loose and ready. Barret comes down like a controlled demolition, both boots slamming the ice, cracks spidering outward from the impact. Gun arm already rotating up and out, because if there is one thing 17 years of Avalanche has taught him, it's that a hard landing in unknown territory means something is about to shoot at you. Aerith lands last, and softest, the way she always does, like the ground had been expecting her, like gravity gives her a discount the rest of them never get. She straightens her jacket, brushes frost off her sleeve, and looks around with the calm, cataloging patience of someone checking into a hotel she's mildly curious about. "Well," she says, "that was new." "Report," Barret barks, sweeping the horizon with his arm cannon. "Report, damn it! Everybody sound off. Tifa." Here. Fine. She's already turning in a slow circle, reading the terrain the way she reads a bar fight before it starts. Exits. Cover. Who's closest? Cloud? Here. He's staring at the floating city. He can't stop staring at the floating city. That's not possible. A lot of things weren't possible yesterday, Aerith says lightly, and here we all are anyway. The four of them stand in a loose cluster on a frost-slick plain somewhere on the outer edge of a kingdom none of them have ever heard of, 4,000 miles and one collapsed dimensional membrane away from a planet that is, at this exact moment, still burning behind them. Above, the tear that spat them out is already closing, a wound of white-green light stitching itself shut with a sound like a held breath finally released. And then it's gone, and the sky is just sky, wrong stars and all, and there is no way home in it anymore. Nobody says that part out loud. Not yet. Options, Barret says instead, because Barret has never in his life dealt with a problem by talking about his feelings first. We got find shelter, find people, find out what in the hell that skyline is supposed to be. Cloud, you're the one always reading terrain like a damn manual. Anything? Cloud is already moving, sword loosened on his back, eyes tracking the tree line half a mile off. Scrub pine, ice-crusted, and past it, cutting straight lines across the snow, something that is unmistakably a road. Manufactured. Recent tire tracks, if that's what they are, pressed into the frost in a tread pattern he doesn't recognize. Somebody's out here, he says, regularly. That's not wilderness. That's a supply route. Calm didn't have roads look like that, Barret mutters, crouching to inspect a tread mark, running a thick finger along its edge. Ain't Shinra tech either. Too clean. Maybe it's not our world's tech at all, Tifa says quietly. And that lands the way it needs to. 4 people going still for a second, letting the actual shape of the situation settle over them, instead of just the adrenaline of it. Aerith is the one who breaks the silence, and she does it by turning her staff slowly in her hand, frowning at something none of the rest of them can perceive. There's a lot of it here, she says. A lot of what? Life energy. It's different than home. Thinner in some places, so thin it's almost not there at all, like something's been eating it. And thicker in others, really thick, in a way that feels almost... She searches for the word, green eyes distant, angry, old and angry, like it's been building up somewhere for a long, long time, with nowhere to go. Cloud doesn't like the sound of that. He's spent enough of his life listening to Aerith describe things no one else can sense, to know that when her voice goes quiet like that, it usually means something is about to try to kill them. Which direction, he says. Not a question. She points, unhesitating, toward the tree line, toward the road, toward the horizon beyond, both where the frost thins into something that might be open plain, and distantly, where the floating city's light burns brightest against the dark. That way, both the thin parts and the angry parts. This whole place feels like it's balanced on something that could tip either way. Great, Barret grunts. So basically Midgar, Tifa agrees, with the ghost of a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, because none of them are actually fine with any of this. They're just very, very practiced at moving forward anyway. They start walking. The patrol finds them 40 minutes later, and it finds them the way patrols find things when they've been trained by a man who does not believe in coincidence, with weapons already drawn. RWBY hears it first. The Aesops always hear things first. It's half the reason Ironwood keeps them close. A disturbance flagged by the perimeter drones, roughly 6 kilometers northeast of the Mantle border checkpoint. 4 heat signatures. No registered scroll IDs. No dust signatures matching any known Grim variant. No aura readings matching any file in the Atlas civilian or military database. Just 4 warm shapes moving steadily across open frost like they own the place. Command, this is RWBY, he says into his comm, jogging the last stretch up the ridge with Marrow at his shoulder, the rest of the squad fanning wide behind. We've got eyes on the anomaly, requesting confirm before engagement. Ironwood's voice comes back clipped, tired, the particular tiredness of a man who has not slept properly since the Amity countdown started and doesn't intend to start now. Confirm to observe only, Clover. I want to know what we're looking at before anyone fires a shot. Robots caused enough damage acting without full information. I won't repeat that mistake. Copy that, sir. Clover crests the ridge and gets his first look at the four intruders, and for a full 3 seconds, an eternity, for a specialist trained to read a scene in half that, he just stares. A man carrying a sword larger than most people are tall, slung with the casual ease of someone who's forgotten it should be heavy. A woman beside him moving with a fighter's economy, no visible weapon at all, hands wrapped like a boxer's. A huge man with a cannon where his right arm should be, not strapped on, not mounted, grafted, moving like it's simply part of him, and a young woman in pink, walking a half step behind the others with a long metal rod in one hand and an expression of mild, curious calm that looks entirely out of place, given everything else about this picture. Command, Clover says slowly. I don't think this is a grim incursion. What is it then? Clover watches the swordsman's head turn, sharp, precise, clocking the ridge, clocking him, before Clover's even sure he's been spotted. Mako blue eyes catch the weak morning light and seem for a half second to glow. Sir, Clover says, I think it's people. I just don't think they're supposed to be here. Below, on the frost, Cloud has already stopped walking. He doesn't look at his friends. He doesn't need to. Years of fighting together means Tifa's already easing half a step to his left. Barret's arm cannon has gone very quiet and very still, in a way that means it's fully charged, and Aerith has simply tilted her head, staff loose, watching the ridgeline with an expression that isn't fear so much as polite attention. Someone's watching us, Cloud says. 6 someones, Tifa corrects, low. Ridge, tree line, and there's at least one more up high. Hear that? That's not wind. Barret follows her gaze skyward, to where a sleek aircraft has gone motionless against the gray cloud cover, hovering with an engine note too quiet for its size. That thing's got no business being that silent, he mutters. Whoever built it knew what they were doing. We could run, Barret adds, not liking the words even as he says them. We don't know this place, Cloud says. Running blind is how you get boxed in. He lets the Buster Sword's tip touch the frost, point down, both hands loose on the grip. Not a threat, but not a surrender either. A soldier's version of open palms. We wait. We see what they do. Above, Clover keys his comm again, watching the swordsman plant his blade in a gesture that reads, unmistakably, as I see you and I'm not running. Sir, they've made us. The lead ones, I think he's signaling he's not hostile. Weapon grounded but not dropped. A pause on the line. Ironwood, weighing it, the way he weighs everything now. Every decision since Amity has felt like diffusing something, and this is one more thing that could go off in his hands if he moves wrong. Bring them in, Ironwood says finally. Non-lethal posture. I want them in a briefing room, not a cell. Not yet. But Clover, if any one of them so much as reaches for that sword with intent, you have my authorization to end it before it starts. I am not gambling Atlas on good manners from something that fell out of the sky. Copy, sir. Clover straightens, raises a hand, and steps out from cover into open view of the ridge. Visible, unarmed hand raised, the other resting easy near Kingfisher's grip. You there, he calls down, voice carrying clean across the frost. Atlas military. I need you to stay right where you are and keep your hands where I can see them. We're going to come down and talk. Nobody needs to get hurt today. Cloud studies him for a long moment. The uniform, the posture, the careful, practiced calm of someone used to being obeyed and trying very hard not to sound like it. Military, he says quietly, to no one but his own team. Different rules, then. Ours or theirs, Tifa murmurs. We'll find out. He doesn't lower the sword, but he doesn't raise it either. And when Clover starts down the ridge with Marrow a half step behind, and the rest of the squad fanning into a loose, professional perimeter, Cloud simply stands there, still as a held breath, waiting to see what kind of world this is going to turn out to be. The walk to the checkpoint takes 20 minutes, and it is by any measure one of the strangest 20 minutes of Cloud Strife's life, which is a genuinely high bar to clear. Nobody draws a weapon. Nobody speaks much either, beyond Clover's clipped, professionally friendly instructions. This way, watch the ice there, almost through, delivered with the specific brand of calm that soldiers use on things they haven't fully classified yet. Marrow keeps glancing sideways at Barret's arm cannon with an expression somewhere between fascination and alarm. His tail, Cloud notices with a start he does his level best not to show, flicks once, twice, in a way that no human tail should move, because it isn't a human tail at all. Cloud has questions. He keeps them to himself. So apparently, does everyone else, and it's Aerith. Of course, it's Aerith, who finally breaks the ice, falling in step beside Marrow with the easy, unbothered friendliness of someone chatting up a stranger at a flower stand. Your tail's lovely, she says. Is that common where you're from? Marrow blinks, caught entirely off guard. Faunus. It's a Faunus thing. You've really never seen one before? Never, Aerith says, delighted rather than alarmed, and something in Marrow's shoulders loosens half an inch, because it is very hard to stay tensely suspicious of someone who's looking at you like you're the most interesting thing that's happened to them all week. Clover, walking point, allows himself the smallest exhale. Command didn't say anything about making friends, but it also didn't say not to, and if the flower girl in pink is disarming Marrow's nerves faster than any protocol could, Clover's not about to interrupt it. The checkpoint resolves out of the frost haze ahead, a squat gray installation bristling with antenna arrays and floodlights, the Atlas insignia stamped stark and white above its main doors, and behind it, rising, the true scale of the floating city finally visible in full. Towers stacked on towers, docking bays the size of stadiums, everything gleaming with the cold, engineered perfection of a civilization that has clearly never had to build anything out of scrap and desperation. Barret whistles low. Whoever's running this joint got money Shinra could only dream about. Or they just didn't burn half their own city down building it, Tifa says, quiet. And there's an edge under the words that Cloud recognizes. Old scar tissue, Midgar-shaped, never quite healed. Inside, the questions start in earnest. A processing room, a scanner arch that hums as they pass through it, and immediately throws up an error cascade so severe that the technician manning it audibly swears and calls for a supervisor. No aura signature match. No semblance classification, energy readings off the charts, unknown type, unknown source. Cloud watches the readouts scroll past on a screen angled just enough for him to see, full of terms that mean nothing to him. Aura, semblance, dust, and understands, with the particular clarity of a man who has spent his whole life being someone else's experiment, exactly what kind of room he's standing in. They don't know what we are, he murmurs to Tifa. Good, she murmurs back. Means they don't know what to be afraid of yet either. That's not always good, Cloud says. He's right, and he knows it, and so, 3 floors up, in an office lined with monitors and the low hum of a city trying very hard not to fall apart, does General James Ironwood, watching the same feed with his human hand pressed flat against the desk and his metal one very still at his side. "Winter," he says, without turning from the screen, "get me everything from that scanner room the second it's processed, and get Miss Polendina down there. If there's an energy signature Atlas has never cataloged, I want her reading it in person, not through a feed." "Yes, sir." Winter Schnee is already moving, but she pauses at the door, looking back at the frozen frame on the monitor. 4 strangers standing in a scan chamber, calm, cooperative, and utterly unlike anything in any Atlas file. "Sir, permission to ask, what's your read?" Ironwood is quiet for a moment, watching the swordsman on screen. The way he stands, weight-balanced, sword never quite out of reach, eyes tracking every camera and every guard with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has done this before, in other rooms, under other flags. "My read," Ironwood says slowly, "is that whatever just happened, it didn't happen by accident, and it didn't happen small. 4 unregistered variables, unknown power source, unknown origin, 3 days before Amity, in the one kingdom in this world that cannot afford another variable it doesn't understand." He finally turns from the screen, jaw set. "I want them assessed. Not detained, not yet. Assessed. I need to know if what fell into my kingdom is a gift, a threat, or a fuse, and I need to know before Salem finds out it's here first." Winter nods once, sharp, and is gone. Down in the scan chamber, Cloud feels the weight of 100 unseen decisions being made about him in rooms he can't see, and does the only thing that's ever worked for him in a world full of people deciding his fate before he's had a chance to speak for himself. He waits, and he watches. And when the door finally opens and a woman in a spotless white uniform steps through with a posture like a drawn blade, he meets her eyes without flinching. Because whatever this world turns out to want from them, Cloud Strife has never once given anyone the satisfaction of seeing him afraid first. "My name is Winter Schnee," she says. "I have some questions for you. I'd suggest you answer them honestly, for all our sakes." Cloud glances once at Tifa, at Barret, at Aerith. A silent question passed between 4 people who have weathered worse rooms than this one, and gets back 4 small, steady nods. "Ask," he says. And Section 1 ends there, on the threshold of the first real conversation between 2 worlds that have no earthly reason to trust each other, and every reason in the world to need to. Winter Schnee has interrogated smugglers, White Fang defectors, and at least 2 attempted Atlas military coups in her career, and she has never once walked into a room feeling as unmoored as she does now, facing 4 strangers who are, by every metric her scanners can provide, simply impossible. She takes the seat across the table anyway, because impossible or not, a room is a room, and she knows how to run one. "Let's start simply," she says, setting a data slate on the table between them, her posture perfectly correct, voice giving away nothing. Names, point of origin. "And I'd like to understand how 4 people with no aura signature, no semblance classification, and no dust markers of any known type ended up on Atlesian soil an hour ago. The swordsman, Cloud, the file already has that much from the checkpoint's audio pickup, studies her for a moment before answering, weighing something Winter can't quite read. "Cloud Strife," he says. "This is Tifa, Barret, Aerith." A short nod at each in turn. "We're not from anywhere you'll have on a map. There was an accident, a rift, a tear, whatever you want to call it. We didn't choose to come here." "An accident," Winter repeats, flat. "A big one," Barret rumbles, arms crossed, the gun arm folded against his chest like a sleeping cannon. "Ain't exactly something we planned for breakfast, lady." Winter doesn't rise to the bait. She's dealt with worse tempers across worse tables. And the energy signature my scanners flagged? The one that doesn't match aura, doesn't match dust, doesn't match anything in our registry going back 200 years? Aerith answers this one, before Cloud can, with the easy candor of someone who has never seen much point in secrecy for its own sake. That's probably us. Or some of it's us, and some of it might just be your world. It's a very loud place, energy-wise. Louder than home. Loud, Winter says slowly. How? There's a lot of life force moving through everything here, Aerith says, tilting her head like she's listening to something none of the rest of them can hear. Thick in some places, thin and strained in others, like something's been drinking it down for a long time and never stopping to let it refill. She pauses. It's not usually like that. Where we're from, it flows. Here it feels like it's been dammed up somewhere and it's starting to leak out sideways. Winter's pen has stopped moving. She glances very deliberately toward the one-way glass behind her, toward the room she knows Ironwood is watching from, the room where Penny is standing very still with her head tilted at an angle that means she's running silent diagnostics on every word coming through the speaker. That's a very specific claim to make about a world you arrived in an hour ago, Winter says carefully. She's not wrong, though, Cloud says. Whatever she's describing, it's not a metaphor. Aerith can read that stuff. Always could. Read it how? Cloud considers the question, then looks to Aerith, a silent question of his own. How much do we show them? And Aerith answers it with the smallest shrug, the kind that says, may as well. Would it help, she says to Winter, if I just showed you? Winter's hand drifts, almost imperceptibly, toward the sidearm at her hip. That depends entirely on what showing me involves. Nothing that'll hurt anyone. Aerith reaches into the small satchel at her side and produces something small, green, faintly luminous, cradled loose in her open palm, where everyone in the room, and, she suspects correctly, everyone behind that one-way glass, can see it clearly. This is Materia. I suppose the simplest way to put it is that it's crystallized life energy, shaped into something a person can carry and channel. Everyone back home who knows how can use it, more or less, once it's equipped properly. It's not magic that belongs to us specially. It's more like a language anyone can learn to speak, if they've got the stone to speak it with. She sets it gently on the table, and it sits there, humming very faintly, pulsing a slow rhythm like something breathing. Winter stares at it. Behind the glass, Penny's diagnostic readout spikes so hard that Ironwood, watching over her shoulder, actually leans in. General, Penny says, voice carrying the particular careful neutrality she uses when she's genuinely uncertain, which is rare enough that Ironwood has learned to take it seriously. That object is radiating an energy signature I cannot classify against any dust variant in the Atlas registry. It is organized, structured, almost like, she pauses, searching for the comparison, like a semblance given physical form and handed to someone else to use. Can you read what it does? Ironwood asks. Not without direct analysis. I would need to be closer. Ironwood is quiet a moment, weighing it, the way he weighs every decision now, with the particular caution of a man who has already watched trust in the wrong direction cost him almost everything. Then he keys the comm to Winter's earpiece. Winter, ask them to demonstrate. Controlled setting only. I want Penny in the room. And I want a hard perimeter around that building before anyone so much as breathes wrong. In the interrogation room, Winter's earpiece clicks, and she straightens fractionally. We'd like a demonstration, she says, controlled. Non-lethal, if that's something you're willing and able to provide. Cloud looks to Aerith, who's already smiling, small and knowing, She's never in her life turned down an invitation to show someone something new. That's fair, Cloud says. Somewhere open. Somewhere nobody's going to get hurt by accident. They take a training yard on the base's lower level. A broad concrete floor ringed with reinforced walls clearly built to survive exactly this kind of test. Scorch marks and impact craters testifying to a long history of Atlas cadets and their instructors putting weapons and semblances through their paces. Winter stands at the observation rail with Clover and Marrow flanking her. Penny stands closer, right at the edge of the floor itself, green eyes fixed and unblinking on the four strangers, arranged loosely in the yard's center. Ironwood watches from the control room above, arms crossed, jaw tight, and does not relax even slightly. Something simple, Cloud says to Aerith. Nothing that'll scare them. Define scare, Barret mutters, but he steps back to give her room anyway, because everyone present, everyone from home, at least, knows exactly what's coming, and everyone from home also knows it's going to look like an act of God to people who've never seen it before. Aerith equips a single materia into the socket on her guard stick, closes her eyes for half a breath, and raises the rod. Cure, she says. Not a shout, not a spell word chanted with drama, just a name spoken plainly, the way you'd say any other word, and the yard fills with soft, warm, impossible light. It blooms from nothing, a slow expanding bloom of pale green gold that washes gently across the concrete, across the scorched walls, across every person standing in the yard, and where it touches, small things happen. A hairline crack in the concrete floor, decades old, knits itself invisibly shut. A long faded scorch mark along the wall lightens, just slightly, as though the material itself remembers being whole. Marrow, who's been nursing a stiff shoulder from a training bruise 2 days old, feels it loosen entirely, the ache simply gone, and makes a small startled noise before he can stop himself. The light fades. The yard is quiet. Nobody moves for a long moment. That, Penny says slowly, into the silence, was a directed restorative energy pulse, with an effective radius of approximately 15 meters, requiring no discernible mechanical delivery system, no visible dust crystal combustion, and no measurable aura depletion in the caster. She turns to look at Ironwood through the observation glass, and even behind synthetic eyes, there's something that reads unmistakably as astonishment. General, I don't know how to classify what I just witnessed. Ironwood doesn't answer immediately. He's staring at the healed hairline crack in the concrete, a structural flaw the maintenance crews have been meaning to patch for 3 years, and thinking, with the particular cold clarity that has kept Atlas standing through worse than this, about every wounded soldier currently filling the medical wing after the Hound's attack. About every huntsman bleeding out on some border skirmish Atlas can't spare the manpower to properly reinforce, and about how much simpler certain problems in his kingdom would become if that light in the training yard were something Atlas could learn to wield. Winter, he says quietly. Get me Dr. Polendina, and get me everything we have on Maiden-adjacent restorative effects. I want a comparison baseline before I decide what I'm looking at. Down in the yard, Barret is inspecting his own shoulder with the exaggerated suspicion of a man checking for a trick. Didn't feel a damn thing, he mutters, and I still got that knot from... You don't have the knot anymore, Tifa points out, amused despite herself. That's rather the point. Winter, for her part, has gone very still at the observation rail, watching the healed crack in the concrete, with an expression she's fighting hard to keep off her face. She has seen maiden power. She has seen semblances that could do remarkable things. She has never in her entire career seen anyone simply heal a room the way one might water a garden. Ask them, Ironwood says over her earpiece, voice carefully even, what else that Materia can do. And ask them how much of it they're carrying. Winter relays the question. Cloud's expression doesn't change, but something in his posture does. A fractional tightening, the wariness of a man who's had this exact conversation before, in another world, with people who wanted his power more than they wanted him. That depends, he says slowly, on what you're planning to use the answer for. It's the first time since they arrived that any of them has pushed back, and Winter registers it immediately. The shift, the edge under the words. She's dealt with defectors and prisoners of war who've given her exactly that tone right before things went badly. We're not planning to take anything from you by force, Winter says, choosing her words with care. But I won't pretend Atlas doesn't have use for something that can heal a wound like that without a single drop of dust. We have wounded, a great many of them, and more coming. If there's a version of this conversation where that Materia helps people who are currently dying in our medical wing, I think you understand why we'd want to have that conversation honestly. Cloud considers this for a long moment. Beside him, Aerith's expression has gone soft in a different way. Not wariness, but a kind of recognition. The particular ache of someone who has spent her whole life being asked for what she can do, rather than who she is, and has decided, more often than not, to give it anyway, on her own terms. We'll talk about that, Cloud says finally, but not as a trade, not as leverage over what happens to us. If your people are hurting, we're not going to sit on something that could help, just to make a point. He glances sideways at Aerith, who nods, small and sure. But we decide how much, and when, and who. Not you. That's not negotiable. Up in the control room, Ironwood exhales slowly through his nose, the exact careful breath of a man recalculating a plan in real time. Winter. Tell them we accept those terms for now. A beat, and tell them I'd like to meet them myself, not through a glass, in a room, face to face, general to. He pauses, searching for the word, and settles, somewhat grimly, on the only one that seems to fit. General to whatever it is they are. The meeting happens 2 hours later, in an office 3 floors up that smells faintly of gun oil and cold coffee, its walls lined with tactical displays currently scrolling readouts on Amity Colosseum's construction timeline, troop deployments along the Mantle border, and, newly added, blinking in urgent amber, an unclassified energy source flag that didn't exist in the system this morning. Ironwood rises when they enter, and Cloud notes, with the automatic threat assessment habit of a man who has fought entirely too many powerful people in his life, the mechanical whir of Ironwood's prosthetic arm, and the particular controlled stillness of someone carrying more weight, literal and otherwise, than his frame quite accounts for. General James Ironwood, he says, extending his human hand. Thank you for the demonstration and for your patience with the questions. Cloud shakes it. The grip is firm, testing, exactly the kind of handshake a soldier gives another soldier when they're both quietly measuring how hard the other one hits. Cloud Strife, he says. You run this whole city? This kingdom, Ironwood corrects, not unkindly, gesturing them toward chairs arranged around a low table already set with tea nobody's touched, Atlas and Mantle below it, though at the moment, run is a generous word for what I'm managing to do with either. He sits, folding his hands, and studies the 4 of them with the frank, assessing look of a man who has learned the hard way not to waste time on pleasantries when the stakes are what they currently are. I'll be direct, because I think you'd prefer that to diplomatic hedging. My kingdom is 3 days from a demonstration I need to go perfectly, in a world that currently has an ancient, near unkillable force actively working to see that it doesn't. I have wounded I can't fully treat, Allies I'm not certain I can fully trust, and now 4 people with an energy signature unlike anything my scientists have ever cataloged, sitting in my office asking me what kind of world this is. He leans forward slightly. So I'll ask you as plainly as I can. Are you a gift to Atlas, a threat to it, or something my kingdom simply hasn't got room to properly weigh yet? The room is quiet. Tifa's eyes flick to cloud. Barret's jaw sets. Aerith watches Ironwood with the particular careful patience of someone deciding, in real time, how much of the truth a stranger has earned. It's Cloud who answers, because it's always Cloud who answers, in the end. Not because he wants the weight of it, but because he's carried worse weight than this, and knows, better than anyone in this room, exactly what it costs to let someone else decide what you are before you've had the chance to say it yourself. We're not a weapon you get to point at something, he says. And we're not a threat looking for a reason. We're 4 people a long way from home, in a world we didn't ask to fall into, trying to figure out how not to make things worse while we work out how to get back. He meets Ironwood's eyes, steady, unflinching. What we turn out to be to Atlas, that's going to depend a lot more on what Atlas turns out to be to us than anything else. Ironwood studies him for a long moment, and something in his expression, old, tired, guarded, shifts, very slightly, into something that isn't quite trust, but is at least the shape trust sometimes takes before it's earned. That, he says slowly, is the most honest answer I've had in this office in longer than I'd like to admit. He sits back, and for the first time since they walked in, some of the coiled tension in his shoulders eases, fractionally. Then let's start there, and General Strife, I use the title loosely, forgive me. Let's find out exactly what kind of world you've landed in, before it finds out what kind of people you are first. Outside the office window, Atlas's floating towers catch the pale afternoon light, and far below, unseen by anyone in that room, something old and starving and endlessly patient turns its attention, for the first time, toward a kingdom that has just become very slightly more interesting than it was that morning. Salem does not sleep, but she has learned, across centuries, to recognize the particular quality of a moment that matters. She feels it the way a spider feels a change in the tension of its web. Not a sound, not quite a vision, but a disturbance in the fabric of a world she has spent an eternity picking apart thread by thread. Something has entered Remnant that was not born of it, something carrying a kind of power she does not recognize, layered thick with life force, in a way that should be impossible given how carefully, how patiently, she has spent centuries starving this world of exactly that. She is standing in the ruins beneath what was once Ever After's border, though she does not yet know to call it that, when the feeling arrives, sharp enough that even Hazel, standing a respectful distance away, notices the flicker of something crossing her face that isn't quite surprise, because Salem has not properly been surprised in longer than Hazel has been alive. My queen? Something has changed, Salem says softly, more to herself than to him. 4 somethings, in fact. She tilts her head, listening to a frequency only she can hear, the way a spider reads vibrations along silk. Atlas. How curious. Hazel says nothing, because he has learned, across years of service, that Salem's silences are rarely empty and are almost never his to fill. There is a kind of power in this world I have spent a very long time making certain no one remembers how to use, Salem continues, quiet, almost wistful. The old magic, the kind the brothers left buried when they abandoned this place to its relics and its squabbling kingdoms. And now, 4 strangers, fallen out of nowhere, carrying something that hums, with exactly that shape, sitting comfortably in James Ironwood's lap, 3 days before his precious Amity project comes to fruition. Something that might, on another face, have been the beginning of a smile, touches the corner of her mouth. I do wonder if he has the faintest idea what he's just welcomed into his kingdom. Should we move against them? Hazel asks. Not yet. Salem turns, her attention already drifting elsewhere, the way it always does once she has finished measuring a new variable against the whole vast shape of her plan. Let Atlas make its mistakes with them first. Fear does most of my work for me in the end, and 4 people wielding a power this world has forgotten how to name will make James Ironwood very afraid indeed, once he understands what he's actually holding. A pause. Send the hound to watch. Quietly, I want to know what they can truly do before I decide whether they are a gift to me or an obstacle. And if Ironwood tries to use them against us, Salem's smile, this time, is unmistakable, the particular cold patience of something that has never once needed to hurry. Then he will learn, as everyone eventually does, that power borrowed from strangers has a way of costing far more than it appears to. She turns fully away, robes trailing across broken stone. Watch them, Hazel, and tell no one else. Some knowledge is safer close. 3 floors above Ironwood's office, in a briefing room repurposed for the occasion, Team RWBY is getting the news secondhand, the way they've gotten most of Ironwood's decisions lately, filtered through Winter, delivered clipped and careful, with just enough gaps in it to make RWBY's scroll brain itch with unanswered questions. So there's 4 of them, RWBY says, for the 3rd time, perched on the edge of the briefing table, with her boots swinging slightly, and one of them just healed a crack in the concrete, with a rock. With Materia, Winter corrects, standing at parade rest near the door, arms folded. Not a rock. A crystallized form of what they call life energy. I watched the demonstration myself. She pauses, choosing her words with visible care, which for Winter Schnee is itself remarkable. It's unlike anything in our registry. Not dust, not a semblance, something else entirely. That's not exactly comforting, Weiss says, arms crossed, standing at the window with her reflection ghosted faintly over Atlas's skyline. An entirely new category of power just fell into a kingdom that already can't agree on how to use the power it's got. Could be a good thing, though, RWBY offers. I mean, if it heals people. If, Blake says quietly, from where she's curled in the corner chair with a book she hasn't turned a page of in 10 minutes. We don't actually know what it costs them to use it, or what else it can do, or what they want, coming from wherever they came from. Her amber eyes flick up, thoughtful rather than suspicious. New power showing up out of nowhere, right when Ironwood's under this much pressure. That's not automatically a gift. Sometimes it's just a different kind of trap. You've gotten cynical, Yang says, not unkindly, propping her boots up on the table's edge until Weiss shoots her a look sharp enough to make her drop them again. I've gotten careful, Blake corrects. There's a difference. Winter, for her part, allows herself the smallest exhale. Not quite agreement, not quite disagreement, just the particular tired neutrality of someone who has spent all morning wrestling with the exact same question and hasn't landed anywhere solid either. The general wants them assessed properly before anything else happens, she says, which means observation, cooperation on both sides where possible, and no unilateral decisions from anyone in this room about what they are or aren't allowed to do. Her eyes move, deliberately, across all 4 of them. That includes you, RWBY. I know how you get about new people. I don't get anything about new people, RWBY protests, entirely unconvincingly, already halfway to the door. I just think if there's someone here who can heal wounds like that, and we've got people in the medical wing who... RWBY, Weiss's voice cuts sharp enough to actually stop her. You are not marching down there to make friends with an unregistered energy anomaly before Ironwood's even finished his own assessment. I was going to be diplomatic about it. You were going to ask them if they wanted to see Crescent Rose, Yang says, grinning despite herself. Don't even try to deny it. Ruby's silence is in fact exactly as damning as Yang expects. Down in the guest quarters, Atlas has hastily converted for their use. A spare officer's suite, comfortable but plainly still under watch, a discreet camera blinking in one corner that none of the four bother pretending not to notice. Cloud sits by the window, watching the floating city's lights flicker on as evening settles over Atlas, and turns Ironwood's question over in his mind for the 100th time since they left his office. Are you a gift to Atlas or a threat to it? It's not a new question, not really. He's spent his whole life being handed exactly that framing by people who wanted something from him. Shinra wanting a weapon, Sephiroth wanting a vessel, even Zack, once, long ago, wanting a friend to carry a dream that turned out to be too heavy for either of them. He's tired of being asked what he is by people who've already half decided the answer before he opens his mouth. You're doing the thing again, Tifa says, settling into the chair across from him, arms loose across her knees. What thing? The thing where you go quiet and start deciding everyone's opinion of you before they've actually formed one. She says it gently, the particular gentle only Tifa has ever managed to get past his defenses. Ironwood's not Shinra, Cloud. Not yet, anyway. Give him the chance to actually be something else before you decide he isn't. I've heard that before, Cloud says. Usually right before someone decides I'm useful for exactly one thing. Maybe? Tifa shrugs, unbothered, watching the city lights below with the same quiet appreciation she's always had for a skyline. Any skyline, so long as it isn't actively falling down around her. Or maybe this is a place where we actually get to decide who we are before anyone else does it for us. We've never really had that before. Might be worth finding out if it's real. Across the room, Barret is inspecting the suite's minibar with deep suspicion, and Aerith is sitting cross-legged on the windowsill, staff across her knees, staring out at the city with an expression Cloud has learned, over the years, to take very seriously. You're doing the thing too, he says to her. The listening thing. There's a lot to listen to here, Aerith says softly, not looking away from the window. This whole place is balanced on something fragile. I can feel it under everything. Like a held breath that's been held so long the person doing the holding's forgotten how to let it out. She's quiet a moment, and there's something else, something old, watching us, the same way we're watching this city. It hasn't decided what it wants yet either. Cloud goes very still. Watching how? Like, right now? I don't know if it's here right now, but it knows we're here. She finally turns from the window, green eyes serious in a way that cuts through the room's easy quiet like a blade. Whatever it is, it's been waiting a very long time for something to change. I don't think it likes being surprised, and I think we just surprised it. Nobody speaks for a long moment. Outside, Atlas's lights flicker against a darkening sky, beautiful and precarious in equal measure, and somewhere far beneath the city's gleaming towers, in Mantle's grimy, forgotten streets, something with black claws and a stolen face turns its attention northward, listening for the shape of four strangers it does not yet fully understand, and does not yet fully fear, but will, before very much longer, come to consider very carefully indeed. Ruby Rose is, by her own admission, not very good at being told to wait. She manages it for exactly one full day, long enough to sit through 2 more of Ironwood's briefings, long enough to watch Weiss review 3 separate threat assessment reports on the strangers with the particular intensity she reserves for anything that might blow up in someone's face, long enough to nearly convince herself that patience is in fact a virtue she possesses. Then Yang mentions, entirely too casually, that she overheard one of the medical techs saying they're 2 units short of the blood plasma they need for the worst of the Hound's surviving casualties, and that's the end of Ruby's patience for the day. She finds Cloud on the training yard's observation deck at dusk, alone, sword laid across his knees, watching Atlas's lights bloom on one tower at a time like something waking up in careful, deliberate stages. "Hi," she says, because Ruby Rose has never once in her life managed an indirect approach to anything. "I'm Ruby. I heard you can heal people. Is that true?" Cloud looks at her for a long moment. A girl who can't be more than 17 or 18, red-tipped hair, an oversized scythe strapped to her back that looks like it weighs more than she does, silver eyes that are doing an admirable job of looking earnest and unthreatening despite the very large weapon. He's met people like her before. Zach once, a long time ago. That same unguarded, straightforward hope that hasn't yet learned to armor itself against the world. "Aerith can," he says. "I can't. Not directly. But you're with her." Would she? Ruby stops, visibly wrestling her own momentum back under control, and tries again, slower. "There's people in the medical wing. From the attack a few weeks back. Some of them aren't getting better as fast as the doctors want." "I know we just met, and I know it's probably weird to ask a total stranger for something this big, but I keep thinking about what happens if we don't ask and someone doesn't make it who could have, and She exhales. "Sorry. I talk a lot when I'm nervous." Cloud studies her, and something in the girl's blunt, unpolished sincerity loosens something in his chest he didn't entirely realize was clenched. "You're not wrong to ask," he says slowly, "but it's not my decision. It's Aerith's. And it's not free. Not in money, I mean. In her. It takes something out of her every time, even if she never says so." "I wouldn't want her to hurt herself for it," Ruby says quickly. I had to ask. Even if the answer's no." Cloud is quiet a moment, weighing her the way he's learned to weigh everyone who asks him for something, not by what they want, but by how they react to being told they might not get it. Ruby's shoulders have already started to slump in preemptive disappointment, already bracing for a no she hasn't fully accepted yet, and there's something in that, something painfully, familiarly decent, that makes up Cloud's mind before he's fully aware it's made. "Ask her yourself," he says. "She'll say yes or no a lot better than I can guess for her." Ruby's whole face lights up. "Really? Okay. Okay, yes, I will. Thank you. Seriously, thank you." "Ruby?" She stops halfway through spinning to leave. "She'll want to know it's her choice," Cloud says. "Not Ironwood's. Not a deal. Just someone asking, because someone needs help. Keep it that way and I think you'll get further than any general's negotiating ever will." Ruby nods, solemn as a vow, and Cloud watches her go with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having just done something that felt, for once, entirely uncomplicated. Aerith says yes before Ruby's even finished asking. She listens to the whole halting, nervous request on a bench outside the medical wing, Ruby's hands twisting in her cloak the entire time like she's still braced for rejection even as she's making the case. And when she finally winds down, Aerith just smiles. The particular soft, knowing smile of someone who has spent her whole life being asked for exactly this kind of thing, and has never once resented the asking. Only the people who forget to ask nicely. "Of course," she says, "you didn't have to build up to it that much, you know. I like helping people. It's sort of my whole thing. I just didn't want it to feel like, I don't know, like I was treating you like a..." Ruby fumbles for the word. "Like a vending machine?" Aerith supplies, amused. "Yeah, kind of. You didn't. You ask like a person asking another person for help, which is exactly what this is. Aerith rises, tucking her staff under one arm. Show me where they are. The medical wing is quiet in the particular hushed way of hospitals everywhere. Low light, soft machinery hums, the smell of antiseptic laid over something Aerith can feel more than smell, a heaviness in the air that has nothing to do with chemicals, and everything to do with the thin, strained life energy she noticed the moment they arrived. She walks the ward slowly, RWBY trailing a respectful half-step behind, and stops at each bed in turn. A young huntsman with burns along one arm that haven't healed properly in 3 weeks. An older woman, off-duty Mantle guard, whose leg was crushed badly enough that the doctors are still debating whether she'll walk again without assistance. A boy, barely older than RWBY, whose aura reserves are so depleted from the attack that he hasn't fully woken in 4 days. Aerith stands at the boy's bedside longest, head tilted, reading something none of the machines in the room can measure. He's close to the edge, she says quietly. Not gone, just flickering, like a candle that's run almost all the way down but hasn't quite gone out. Can you? Yes. Aerith equips her materia, settles her staff, and closes her eyes. This one's going to take more than the training yard did. Stay back a little. The light that blooms this time is slower, deeper. Not the bright, easy wash of before, but something that pours steady and patient over the boy's still form, sinking into him like water into dry ground. And RWBY watches, breath held, as the flat, worrying line on his monitor lifts, steadies, strengthens into something that finally looks like a person sleeping, instead of a person barely holding on. Aerith sways slightly when the light fades, and RWBY's hand shoots out automatically to steady her. You okay? Just tired. Aerith straightens, breathing a little harder than before, but smiling all the same as the boy's eyes flutter, and open, and focus, blearily, on the ceiling for the first time in 4 days. There, that's better. The boy's confused murmur draws a nurse at a run, and within minutes, the ward is a quiet flurry of activity. Doctors checking readouts they don't quite believe, murmured astonishment passed bed to bed, and RWBY standing in the middle of it with an expression of such pure, uncomplicated joy that Aerith finds herself smiling just watching her. 2 more, Aerith says, nodding toward the burned huntsman and the woman with the crushed leg. I've got enough left for those, I think. Not much past that today. You don't have to push yourself. I know. Aerith is already moving toward the next bed. I'm choosing to, anyway. That's sort of the whole point of choosing. By the time she's finished, the ward's mood has shifted entirely. Hushed disbelief, giving way to something warmer, quieter. The particular unguarded gratitude of people who came into work today expecting a long, grim shift and are leaving it with 3 patients, recovering faster than any of them thought possible. A senior physician corners Aerith near the door, 6 questions clearly queued up behind her eyes, and Aerith answers what she can, patient and unhurried, while RWBY hovers nearby, practically vibrating with something that isn't quite pride, because it isn't really hers to be proud of, but feels enormously, unaccountably good all the same. Word reaches Ironwood's office within the hour, and it reaches him in a form he did not order and cannot entirely control. Not a formal briefing, but a wave of quiet, unmistakable relief moving through his own medical staff. 3 separate department heads requesting to speak with him personally about a development they can barely describe without sounding, in their own words, genuinely emotional about it, sir, which I understand isn't standard reporting language, but I don't know how else to put this. He listens to all 3 reports standing at his window, looking out over Mantle's grimy sprawl below, and by the time the 3rd department head has finished, something in his chest, Some old, exhausted knot he's been carrying since long before the hound's attack has loosened, fractionally, for the first time in longer than he can easily remember. "Thank you," he says. "That will be all for now." Alone, he allows himself a moment, just a moment, of something that isn't quite hope, because Ironwood has learned, hard, the cost of hoping too quickly for too much. But it's close to hope. Close enough that he lets himself sit with it before he calls Winter in. They healed 3 patients in the medical wing, he tells her when she arrives. Unprompted, no demand for anything in return. "I heard," Winter says. "Miss Rose, apparently." Of course it was Miss Rose. A ghost of something almost like a smile crosses Ironwood's face before it settles back into its usual careful weight. "I need you to understand something, Winter, and I need you to hold it in mind every time you deal with these 4 from now on." He turns from the window. "That kind of power freely given without demand. That is either the single best thing that's happened to this kingdom since I took command, or it is the single most effective way anyone has ever found to make Atlas trust something it shouldn't. I don't yet know which. And until I do, I need every interaction we have with them handled with exactly that much care. You think it's a trick. I think," Ironwood says slowly, "that I have spent the last several months learning, at enormous cost, that the people I trusted the most were capable of things I never saw coming, and that the people I trusted the least sometimes weren't lying to me at all. I no longer know how to tell the difference quickly, so I'd rather be careful and wrong than certain and wrong, if it's all the same to you." Winter nods, accepting this the way she accepts most of Ironwood's careful, weathered caution these days, not without sympathy, but without argument either. "There's something else, sir," she says. "Miss Nikos and Team RWBY have both requested to spend more time with the visitors directly. RWBY in particular has already." "I know what RWBY's already done," Ironwood says, dry. "Let it continue," cautiously. "If Team RWBY builds a rapport with them that we can't build through interrogation rooms and threat assessments, I'm not going to stand in the way of that, provided it stays within reasonable bounds." He pauses. "But keep someone close, discreetly. If Salem has so much as a whisper of what's sitting inside my walls right now, I want warning before she acts on it, not after." "Understood, sir." Winter turns to go, and Ironwood's voice stops her at the door, quieter than before. "Winter, sir, for what it's worth," he says, "I hope this one turns out to be exactly what it looks like. I could use something in this kingdom that's simply, uncomplicatedly good, for once." Winter doesn't have an answer for that, not one she trusts herself to say aloud, in a kingdom where uncomplicated good things have had a way of turning complicated fast, lately, so she simply nods and leaves him to his window and his city and the small, fragile, dangerous hope he's just allowed himself to hold. That night, in the guest suite, Aerith sleeps deeply and well for the first time since the livestream spat them out into this cold, strange world, and Cloud sits up a while longer than the others, watching her sleep, thinking about the particular, familiar ache of watching someone he loves give away pieces of herself to people who need it more than he's always comfortable with. "She's happy," Tifa says quietly from the doorway, watching him watch her. "You can see it, even in her sleep. She's not just doing this because she's good at it. She's doing it because it feels like home to her, being needed, being useful for something that isn't a weapon." "I know," Cloud says. "That's not what worries me." "What worries you then?" Cloud is quiet a long moment, watching the slow rise and fall of Aerith's breathing, thinking of Shinra, of Sephiroth, of every single time in his life that someone's gift has been measured, catalogued, and eventually claimed by people who decided it belonged to them more than it belonged to the person giving it. "What worries me," he says finally, is that the last time someone this powerful and this generous fell into the hands of people running a kingdom under this much pressure, it didn't end with everyone getting to keep choosing for themselves how their power got used. He looks up at Tifa, something old and tired in his eyes. I want to believe Ironwood's different. I really do. I just don't know yet if wanting to believe something is the same as it being true. Tifa crosses the room, sits beside him, and for a long moment neither of them says anything at all. Just two people a very long way from home, watching over the people they love, waiting to find out exactly what kind of world has decided to need them. Outside, far beneath Atlas's gleaming towers, something with a stolen face and patient, ancient hunger finishes its watching for the night, and turns, silent, to carry word of a healer with impossible power back to a queen who has been waiting, for longer than anyone in that guest suite can imagine, for exactly this kind of opportunity to present itself. Robin Hill hears about the healings before Ironwood's own council does, because Robin Hill has spent years making sure Mantle hears things before Atlas ever bothers to tell it. She gets the story from a nurse's cousin, who got it from an off-duty guard, who got it from someone in the medical wing itself, and by the time it reaches her, 3 degrees removed and half exaggerated, as these things always are by the time they reach the lower district, it has already become something close to legend. A healer fell out of the sky, and Ironwood's keeping her, and she's already fixed 3 people the doctors had given up on. That true? She asks Fiona, tossing the report onto the war table in the Happy Huntress's cramped safe house, ringed with maps of Mantle's evacuation zones and supply routes, marked in a dozen different colored inks. Mostly, Fiona says, there's 4 of them, not 1. And it's not magic exactly, some kind of energy nobody's ever seen. But the healing part's real, whole ward's talking about it. Robin's jaw sets. The particular set it takes whenever something happens in Atlas that might, if handled right, actually reach the people who need it most in Mantle, instead of disappearing into a general's private project. And let me guess, she says. Ironwood's got 'em locked up in some tower, deciding what to do with them before anyone in Mantle sees a drop of it. Not locked up exactly, but, yeah, contained, assessed. All the usual Ironwood words for mine. Robin exhales through her nose, sharp. There's people down here who need that kind of help worse than anyone in his medical wing. Frostbite cases from the evacuation routes. Kids who can't afford a huntsman-grade healer even if one were available, which they aren't, because Atlas doesn't send huntsmen down to Mantle unless there's a photo opportunity in it. She's already moving toward the door, pulling her coat on. I want to talk to them myself. Not through Ironwood, directly. He's not going to just let you walk in. He doesn't have to let me, Robin says, with the particular grim humor of someone who spent years finding cracks in Atlas's careful control. I've got a council seat. I'll use the front door for once and see how far that gets me. It gets her further than she expects, mostly because Ironwood, watching the political weather with the same careful attention he gives everything else these days, has already decided that keeping Robin Hill entirely locked out of this would cost him more than any risk of letting her in. Councilwoman Hill, he says, when she's shown into his office, not bothering to hide the wariness in his tone. I assume this isn't a social call. When has it ever been? Robin drops into the chair across from him, without waiting for an invitation. I want to talk to your visitors. Not about them. To them. Directly? No filter? No minder standing over my shoulder reporting back to you. That's not unreasonable, Ironwood says, which surprises her enough that she blinks. But I'll be present, or Winter will. I'm not leaving 4 unregistered variables alone with a councilwoman who spent the last year building a private militia out of my kingdom's discontent. Fair, Robin says. Because it is, and because she's not here to fight that particular battle today. But I want it clear, up front. Whatever they decide to do with what they've got, that's their call, not yours. I'm not here to cut a deal over their heads. I'm here to ask them myself, same as anyone else would. Ironwood studies her for a long moment, and something in his expression, tired, wary, but not entirely unsympathetic, shifts slightly. That's remarkably close to what I told Winter to make sure of, myself, he says. Fine, I'll arrange it. But Robin, if you're planning to use whatever they say to build another wedge between Mantle and this office, I want you to understand that I will notice, and it will cost you more goodwill than you have to spare right now. Noted, Robin says, entirely unbothered. Doesn't mean I'll listen. The meeting happens that afternoon, in a smaller, less intimidating room than Ironwood's office. His idea, a small concession Robin notes and files away for later. And it's Barret, of all of them, who takes to Robin Hill fastest, recognizing something in her clipped, no-nonsense frustration that reminds him powerfully of his own younger self, standing in Sector 7 with a gun for an arm and a city's indifference for an enemy. So let me get this straight, Barret says, arms crossed, once Robin's laid out Mantle's situation in blunt, unflinching detail. The frostbite, the overcrowded shelters, the particular grinding poverty of a lower district that exists, in her words, so Atlas up top never has to look at what it costs to keep this city floating. You got a whole chunk of this kingdom just left to freeze while the folks up here got healers on retainer and towers made of light? That's about the size of it, Robin says. Barrett's expression darkens in a way Cloud recognizes instantly, the particular slow-burning anger of a man who has spent his whole life fighting exactly this kind of unfairness, and never once learned to be anything but furious about it. Sounds like Midgar, he says, low. Sounds like Sector 7 looking up at the plate every damn day of my life. I don't know what that is, Robin says, but I'm guessing it means you understand the shape of the problem better than most people who fall out of the sky into a general's office usually do. I understand it plenty. Barret looks to Cloud, then to Aerith, something decided already in his eyes. Whatever we got, however much of it there is to go around, Mantle gets its share. I don't care what Ironwood's planning upstairs. Ain't letting another city's poor folks freeze while somebody up top decides who deserves help first. Aerith's smile, watching him, is soft and a little sad. The particular sadness of someone who has spent her whole life watching good people rediscover the same injustice in every world they land in. I agree, she says simply. Whatever I can do, I want it to go where it's needed most, not just where it's easiest to reach. She looks to Robin. Take me to Mantle. I'll see for myself what's needed. Ironwood, silent until now, shifts slightly in his seat. Not quite objection, but something close to it. I'd ask you to consider the security implications of that, he says carefully. Mantle's border isn't as controlled as Atlas proper. If Salem's forces have any interest in you at all, they probably already know we're here, Cloud says. Whatever's watching us noticed on the first night. Hiding in Atlas isn't going to change that. Ironwood's jaw tightens because he suspects Cloud is right, and he hates that he suspects it. Then at minimum, I want an ASOP's escort. Not to control you, he adds, before Barret can object. To protect you, if it comes to that, and to protect Mantle's people if something follows you down there that shouldn't. Cloud considers this, glances at the others, gets a round of small nods. That's fair, he says. We're not looking to make this harder for you than it has to be, General. We just don't answer to you about where we choose to help. Understood, Ironwood says, and means it, though something in his chest tightens all the same. The particular ache of a man watching control slip, incrementally out of his hands, in a kingdom where he has learned, Hard, exactly how expensive losing control can become. The trip to Mantle happens 2 days later, and it changes something in all four of them in ways none of them entirely expect. Mantle is nothing like Atlas. No floating towers, no gleaming white spires, just grim, gray, snow-choked streets crowded with people wrapped in whatever warmth they can find, queuing for supply drops that never quite stretch far enough, children playing in alleys between buildings, patched together from scavenged metal and hope. Barret goes quiet the moment they descend below the last checkpoint, and Cloud recognizes the particular quality of that silence, the old, familiar grief of a man looking at a plate shadow he thought he'd left behind forever, finding it here too, in a world he'd never even heard of a week ago. Same damn story everywhere, Barret mutters, watching a woman haul frozen water back to a shelter on a sled, built from salvaged debris. Don't matter what world you're in, somebody's always up top deciding who gets to be warm. Aerith works through the afternoon and into the evening, moving from shelter to shelter with Robin as her guide, healing frostbite, easing chronic coughs that have gone untreated for lack of proper care, sitting with an elderly man whose lungs have never fully recovered from years of working Mantle's industrial furnaces, and giving him, in the space of a single quiet hour, the easiest breathing he's had in a decade. She doesn't push herself past what she can safely give. Cloud watches her carefully, ready to call a halt the moment her steps start to falter. But what she gives freely, without hesitation, without asking anything in return beyond the simple gratitude of people who've stopped expecting anyone from above to notice they exist. Tifa spends the day differently. Not healing, since that's not a gift she carries, but simply present, helping haul supplies, hauling a collapsed support beam off a half-crushed storage shed with her bare hands while 3 Mantle workers stare in open astonishment, sitting with a group of frightened children in a shelter while their parents wait in a supply line, telling them stories about a bar back home that doesn't exist anymore in any world they can return to. By evening, word has spread through Mantle the way word always spreads through places that have learned to survive on rumor and hope. Not the exaggerated legend that reached Robin 2 days ago, but something steadier, truer, the particular quiet gratitude of a city that has just watched 4 strangers choose it, unprompted, over the comfort and safety of the kingdom sitting above it. "You didn't have to do all this," Robin says, as evening settles, and Aerith finally, visibly, allows herself to rest, sitting on an overturned crate, with a cup of something hot Fiona pressed into her hands. Ironwood would have been furious if you'd just stayed up top. "He wasn't wrong to be careful," Aerith says, "but careful isn't the same as right. This is where it was needed. That's really all the reason I ever need." Robin studies her for a long moment, something shifting behind her eyes, the particular recalibration of someone who came into this expecting to use 4 strangers as leverage against a general she doesn't trust, and is finding, instead, something closer to genuine allies. "For what it's worth," she says finally, "whatever happens with Ironwood, with Atlas, with all of it, Mantle won't forget this. I won't forget this. I hope that's not a debt," Aerith says, gentle but firm. "I really don't want anyone owing us anything for this. That's not what it's for." "It's not a debt," Robin says. "It's just good to know, for once, that somebody with real power looked at this city and decided it mattered as much as the one on top of it." They returned to Atlas that night to find Ironwood waiting for them personally at the checkpoint, arms folded, expression unreadable in the particular way that means he's been turning something over for hours and hasn't fully settled on how to say it. "I heard about Mantle," he says, "once the Aesop's escort has peeled off and it's just the 5 of them standing in the cold entry bay." "We figured you would," Cloud says, wary, bracing for the pushback he half expects. But Ironwood surprises him. "I'm not here to reprimand you," he says. "I asked around, talked to a few of the Mantle liaison officers who went with you. What I heard was good, genuinely good, without an angle attached to it, which is rarer in this kingdom than I'd like to admit." He's quiet a moment, choosing his next words with visible care. "I want to be honest with you, because I think you've earned that much. I don't fully trust easily anymore. I've been burned too many times by people I thought I understood. But what you did today, going to Mantle, giving without demanding anything back, that's the kind of thing I used to believe Atlas stood for, before I let fear talk me into forgetting it." He meets Cloud's eyes. "I don't know yet what you are to this kingdom, but I'm starting to hope it's something good. And I don't hope for much these days." Cloud studies him for a long moment, the tired lines of a man carrying more weight than any one person should have to, the particular careful hope of someone who's learned, the hard way, not to hope too loudly, and feels something in his own guarded chest loosen, just slightly, in answer. "We're not looking to be Atlas's weapon," Cloud says, "but we're not looking to be its enemy either. Give us reason to trust you, and we'll give you reason to trust us back. That's about as much promise as I've got to offer anyone these days." "That," Ironwood says, "is more than I've had from most people in a very long time." Above them, Atlas's towers burn bright against the dark, and far below in Mantle's shadowed streets, word of 4 strangers who chose the forgotten city over the shining one continues to spread, city block to city block, in a way that neither Ironwood nor Robin Hill nor even Salem herself has yet fully understood the weight of. A change small enough to seem harmless, and large enough in time to shift the balance of everything that's coming. The Grim come at dusk, 3 days after Mantle, and they come in a formation nobody in Ironwood's command has seen before. It starts as a flicker on the perimeter sensors, isolated, easy to dismiss, the kind of reading that gets logged and forgotten a dozen times a week along Mantle's border. But this one doesn't fade. It grows, spreads, resolves within the hour into something the sensor operators haven't logged in years. A coordinated Grim surge, dozens of Beowulfs and a scattering of Ursi moving in disciplined waves toward the lower district's eastern supply route, timed with an unsettling precision that suggests something is directing them rather than simply herding along a scent of fear. "That's not natural behavior," Winter says, watching the tactical display bloom red across the projection table, Ironwood at her shoulder, jaw already tight. "Grim don't coordinate like this, not without something pushing them. The Hound," Ironwood says quietly, "or something like it." He straightens, already reaching for his comm. "Get every available Huntsman team to the eastern supply route, and get me Team RWBY, Ace Ops, and..." He pauses, weighing something, then decides, "and find our guests. If this is what I think it is, I'd rather know what they can actually do in a real fight than continue guessing." Cloud hears the alarm from the guest suite's window, a low, citywide klaxon that needs no translation, the universal sound of somewhere about to catch fire, and is reaching for the Buster Sword before Winter's voice even finishes crackling through the doorcom. "Grim incursion, Eastern Mantle supply route. General Ironwood is requesting." "We're coming," Cloud says, already moving. Behind him, Tifa's pulling her gloves on. Barret's gun arm is cycling through an ominous mechanical whir that means it's switching to something heavier than the training yard setting, and Aerith is on her feet with her staff already in hand, expression gone sharp and focused in a way that has nothing to do with the gentle patience she showed in the medical wing. "How bad?" Barret asks, through the door. "Bad enough that the General's asking for you specifically," Winter says. "Move fast. I'll brief you en route." The eastern supply route is a narrow, half-frozen valley cut between Mantle's outer wall and a scrubby tree line, currently lit by floodlights, and the muzzle flash of a dozen huntsmen holding a line that's visibly, dangerously close to breaking. Beowulfs pour out of the tree line in numbers Cloud has never seen from any single enemy type back home. Dozens, then more than dozens, black shapes with white boneplate masks and red eyes catching the floodlight in a way that makes the whole tree line look like it's studded with embers. Ruby's already in the thick of it when they arrive, crescent rows cutting a wide, brutal arc through a cluster of Beowulfs, Weiss laying down glyph-anchored dust bursts to slow the flanking wave, Yang wading in close with Ember Celica roaring, Blake weaving through the chaos with Gamble Shroud's ribbon trailing silver. It's a good line. It's also, unmistakably, a line about to break, because for every Beowulf they put down, 3 more emerge from the tree line behind it. There's too many, Clover shouts, Kingfisher's line snapping taut as he hauls himself clear of a lunging Ursa, Marrow's chain scythe whirling beside him in a defensive arc. This isn't a normal surge. Something's feeding them. Cloud takes one look at the field, the sheer numbers, the disciplined wave pattern advance, the way the huntsman's line is bending inward at the flanks, and makes the only call that makes sense. Tifa, left flank. Barret, hold the center, give them cover fire. Aerith, stay back, watch for anything that isn't grim-shaped. He's already moving, sword coming off his back in one smooth motion. I've got the breach. Nobody argues. 7 years of fighting together doesn't require an argument. What happens next is the first time Remnant has ever seen anything like Cloud Strife fight, and it leaves an impression on every witness that will outlast the battle itself by a very long time. He doesn't fight like a huntsman. Huntsmen fight with aura as armor, with semblances as tricks, with weapons built to transform and adapt mid-swing. Cloud fights like something else entirely. Pure, honed, brutal economy. A blade nearly his own height, moving with a speed that shouldn't be physically possible for something that heavy. Each strike landing with the kind of controlled, contained violence that comes from years of training against opponents who could tear a Beowulf apart without breaking a sweat. He cuts through the first wave in a single sweeping arc, the Buster Sword's edge catching 3 Beowulfs at once and scattering them in a spray of dissolving black smoke, and doesn't stop moving, doesn't slow, carves a channel straight into the heart of the breach where the grim are thickest, and simply holds it, alone, a single figure standing in a gap that should require a squad to close. Divine intervention, Clover mutters, staring, before a Beowulf's claws nearly take his head off and reminds him rather forcefully that this is not the moment for staring. Tifa moves differently, closer, faster, a blur of controlled aggression that puts every strike exactly where it needs to be, palms and knuckles finding weak points in grim bone plating that huntsman weapons usually have to hack through. She doesn't carry a weapon because she doesn't need one. Each strike detonates with a compressed, focused force that sends Beowulf skidding backward, and when a pair of Ursae flank her at once, she simply plants her feet, exhales, and unleashes a combination that ends with both of them dissolving mid-air, her breathing barely elevated. She's not even using a semblance, Weiss says, breathless, watching from 20 feet away as she reloads a dust chamber. That's just training? That's just her? Apparently, Blake says, equally stunned, cutting down a Beowulf that strays too close while she's watching. Barret is, by every account later given, the single loudest thing on the battlefield. His gun arms cycling between suppressing fire and heavier single-shot bursts that punch clean through Ursa hide with a crack like thunder, each impact throwing the grim backward, hard enough to clear space for the huntsman line to reform. He roars something that isn't quite a battle cry and isn't quite profanity, standing his ground at the center of the line like an immovable wall, and more than one huntsman finds themselves fighting a little braver, simply because of the sheer, unshakable confidence radiating off the man. And then the numbers spike again. A second wave, larger, emerging from deeper in the tree line, and among them something bigger, a hulking, grim variant none of the huntsmen recognize, easily 3 times the size of an Ursa, its approach shaking the frozen ground with every step. "That's new," Marrow says, backing up several steps despite himself. "That is very new." "Alpha Beowulf, mutated," Winter calls, arriving at a dead run with her saber already drawn, glyphs blooming beneath her boots to cover the last stretch of ground. "I've never seen one this size." "Command I need." "I've got it," Cloud says, already moving toward it, sword raised. "Cloud, wait!" Tifa starts, but he's already gone, closing the distance in a dead sprint, and what happens in the next 10 seconds becomes, within the hour, the single most repeated story in every huntsman barracks in Atlas. Mutated Alpha swings a claw the size of a shield. Cloud meets it head-on with the Buster Sword's flat, absorbing the impact with a bone-jarring grunt of effort and skidding backward through packed snow. And then, before the Grim can recover its swing, he's moving forward again, blade catching the low evening light, and executes a strike so fast and so precise that half the watching huntsmen genuinely don't process what happened until the Alpha is already dissolving into black smoke behind him. Silence, for a half-second, across that section of the battlefield, the particular stunned quiet of people who've just watched something happen that their brains haven't finished cataloging yet. "Regroup and push." Ironwood's voice cuts through the commnet, sharp with something that might be relief. "The line's holding. Everyone converge on the breach, now." The tide turns within minutes. With Cloud, Tifa, and Barret anchoring the center, the huntsman line reforms, tightens, and begins pushing the remaining Grim back toward the tree line, instead of bleeding ground toward it. Aerith, true to her word, stays back from the front line but isn't idle. Twice she catches a wounded huntsman being dragged clear and closes the gap between danger and death with a quick, precise burst of restorative light. And once, when RWBY takes a claw strike across the shoulder that should have put her out of the fight entirely, Aerith is there within seconds, healing the wound clean before RWBY's even fully processed being hit. "Thanks," RWBY gasps, wide-eyed, already turning back into the fight with her shoulder good as new. "Don't thank me. Be careful," Aerith calls after her, exasperated and fond in equal measure. By the time the last Beowulf dissolves into smoke and the tree line falls quiet again, the eastern supply route looks less like a battlefield and more like the aftermath of something that should have been a full-scale disaster, and somehow, improbably, wasn't. Ironwood arrives on the field 20 minutes later, surveying the scene with the particular grim satisfaction of a commander counting a cost that came in far lower than he'd braced for. Casualties, minor, a handful of injuries, all treatable, none fatal. A result that by every tactical model his staff ran that morning should have been impossible against a surge that size. "Report," he says, and Winter gives it to him crisp and clean. But it's Clover who adds the part the report can't quite capture. "Sir, with respect, I don't think report covers what I just watched," Clover says, still slightly shell-shocked, glancing toward where Cloud stands at the tree line's edge, sword resting point down in the snow, breathing hard but steady. "That swordsman took out an alpha mutation the size of a transport shuttle in one hit." "One hit, sir. I've never seen anything move like that." Ironwood's gaze follows Clover's toward Cloud, and something in his expression, careful, calculating, the particular arithmetic of a general who has just watched a potential asset prove itself in the field far beyond his most optimistic projections, shifts, visibly. "Get me a full debrief," he says. "And Clover, Good work holding the line before they arrived. That mattered too. He crosses the field himself, boots crunching frost, and finds Cloud exactly where he expects. Quiet, watchful, already scanning the tree line for any sign of a third wave that, mercifully, doesn't come. That was, Ironwood says, choosing his words with obvious care, not what I expected, even after the healing demonstration. We don't do things by half measures, Cloud says simply. So I've noticed. Ironwood studies him a moment longer. I have to ask, and I want an honest answer, not a diplomatic one. If Atlas needed that, what you just did out here, on a larger scale, against something bigger than a grim surge, would you be willing? Cloud's expression doesn't change, but something behind his eyes goes very still and very careful. The old wariness, the practiced instinct of a man who has spent his whole life being asked exactly this question by people who wanted to own the answer. That depends, he says slowly, on what something bigger turns out to mean, and on whether you're asking me as a person or asking what I am as a weapon. He holds Ironwood's gaze, steady. I've been the second one before, General. Wasn't my choice then. It's my choice now. So choose your next question carefully. Ironwood is quiet a long moment, and something in his tired, guarded expression shifts. Not quite chastened, but recalibrated. The particular adjustment of a man who has just been reminded, gently but firmly, exactly where the line sits. Understood, he says finally. I withdraw the question as asked. Let me ask it properly instead. If Atlas is ever in a fight it can't win alone, would you choose to stand with it? Not as a weapon, I point, as someone deciding, for yourself, that it's worth standing for. Cloud considers this, genuinely considers it, weighing Ironwood's face against 7 years of learning to read exactly this kind of question, and finds, somewhat to his own surprise, that he doesn't immediately distrust the man asking it. Ask me again when it matters, Cloud says. I'll give you a real answer then. Right now, all I can tell you is we're not looking to run from a fight that's actually worth having. We'll see if this one turns out to be that. Behind them, the tree line stays quiet, and far beyond it, deep in the dark places Remnant has never fully mapped, something ancient and patient finishes watching the battle's end with cold, careful interest. Because whatever Salem sent those Grimm to test, the answer it received was considerably more than she bargained for, and somewhere in the depths of her endless calculation, a queen who has not been surprised in centuries begins, very quietly, to reconsider her plans. The victory at the eastern supply route should feel like a turning point, and for 3 days, it does. Word spreads through both Atlas and Mantle in a way that surprises even Ironwood, not the guarded, careful rumor that followed the medical wing healings, but something closer to genuine, uncomplicated relief. A surge that should have cost dozens of lives cost almost none. 4 strangers who owe this kingdom nothing fought at the front of that line like it was their own home worth defending. For the first time since the Hound's attack, something in Atlas's exhausted, frightened public mood lifts, just slightly, and Ironwood, watching approval ratings climb for the first time in months, watching council members who've spent weeks second-guessing every decision he makes, suddenly a little less hostile in briefings, allows himself, cautiously, to hope that things might actually be turning a corner. He should know better by now. He almost does know better. But hope, even cautious hope, has a way of making a man slower to notice the ground shifting beneath him. It's Weiss who notices first, 3 days after the battle, poring over supply requisition logs in a briefing she wasn't technically required to attend, because Weiss Schnee has never once in her life trusted a victory enough to stop checking the numbers behind it. General, she says, interrupting a routine council update with the particular sharp urgency that makes everyone at the table stop talking. The dust shipment routes through the southern checkpoint. 3 of the last 5 convoys are running behind schedule. Not by a little. By enough that if this keeps up, the Amity Colosseum's power reserves are going to fall short of projected need by launch day. Ironwood's expression doesn't change, but something behind his eyes goes very still. Behind schedule how? Officially, weather delays. Unofficially, Weiss slides a data slate across the table. I cross-reference the delay pattern against known White Fang activity in the southern approach corridors. It's not conclusive, but it's not nothing either. White Fang or something using the White Fang as cover, Blake says quietly, from her seat near the wall, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral in the way it always goes when the conversation turns toward her former organization. There's a difference, and I think we should find out which before we assume. Ironwood absorbs this in silence for a long moment, and Cloud, present at this briefing at Ironwood's own request, still getting used to being included in rooms like this rather than watched from behind glass, feels the same old unease stir, the particular instinct honed across years of watching Shinra's careful plans start quietly, invisibly, coming apart at the seams. Someone's testing the supply lines before they hit something bigger, Cloud says. That's my read too, Winter says. Salem doesn't waste resources on random disruption. If she's slowing the dust convoys, it's because she wants Amity's reserves short for a reason. Or she wants us distracted watching the convoys, Aerith says quietly, from her seat beside Cloud, staff resting against her knee. Everyone turns to look at her. That's usually how it works, isn't it? Make you watch one hand so carefully you don't notice what the other one's doing. Ironwood studies her for a moment, and something in his tired expression tightens further. Where would you look if you were her, he asks. Aerith is quiet a moment, head tilted in the listening way that means she's reaching for something beyond simple guesswork. Somewhere thin, she says slowly. Somewhere the life energy here already feels stretched almost to breaking. There was a place like that near where we landed. I could feel it even that first night. If I had to guess, I'd say she's already found it too, and whatever's happening at your southern checkpoint is just the part she doesn't mind you seeing. The room goes quiet. Ironwood's jaw sets, hard. Winter, I want full reconnaissance on every checkpoint approach south of Mantle, effective immediately. And I want Team RWBY, Aesop's, and our guests on standby. If this is the opening move I think it is, I don't want to be caught flat-footed twice in 1 month. The second move comes 4 days later, and it does not come as a grim surge. It comes as Tyrian Kalos, dropping from the shadowed underside of a supply transport into the middle of a routine southern checkpoint patrol, scorpion tail already lashing, madness already singing in his voice before the first scream even goes up. Oh, don't mind me, he croons, laughing as he carves through the first 2 guards before they've fully drawn their weapons. I'm just here to deliver a message from my queen. Something about... His tail flicks toward the fallen convoy manifest, scattering papers into the wind, checking in on Atlas's precious little timeline. The alarm reaches Atlas within minutes, and this time Ironwood doesn't hesitate. Aesop's Team RWBY, full deployment, he says, already moving toward the war room. And get me our guests. Whatever's coming next, I want everything Atlas has standing against it. Cloud, Tifa, Barret, and Aerith arrive at the southern checkpoint to find a scene of controlled chaos. Aesop's already engaged, Clover's line snapping taut around a support beam to yank Marrow clear of a lashing tail, Winter's glyphs blooming in a defensive ring around the wounded, and at the center of it, laughing, spinning, utterly unbothered by the numbers arrayed against him, a man who moves like violence given a body and a grudge. "New friends," Tyrion calls, delighted, spotting them the instant they arrive. "Oh, how wonderful. My queen did mention you might be interesting. Let's see exactly how interesting, shall we?" He comes at Cloud first, tail lashing in a blur, and Cloud meets it head-on, Buster Sword catching the strike with a shriek of metal on chitin that sends sparks scattering across the frost. Tyrion's grin doesn't waver even as he's pushed backward, boots skidding. "Oh, that's lovely," he laughs, circling, manic energy building. Real weight behind that. Not aura, something else entirely. My queen's going to want every detail of that. "Tell your queen," Cloud says, low. "She can come ask me herself, if she wants details that badly." "Oh, I intend to tell her everything," Tyrion says, and lunges again, faster this time, tail and blade weaving in a pattern designed to overwhelm rather than simply strike. And it's Tifa who closes the gap from the side, catching his wrist mid-strike, with a grip that makes even Tyrion's manic grin falter, just slightly, at the raw strength behind it. "You talk a lot," she says, and drives a knee into his ribs hard enough to send him skidding 20 feet across the frost. Tyrion recovers fast, faster than any of them expect, already back on his feet, tail flicking blood from its tip, delighted rather than dissuaded. "Oh, this is going to be fun to report back," he crows. "4 little variables and not a single one of them fighting like anything my queen's ever cataloged. She does so love a puzzle." Barrett's gun arm swings up, already tracking. "How about you report back from further away?" he growls, and unleashes a suppressing burst that forces Tyrion into a scrambling retreat behind the transport's wreckage. It's not a clean fight. Tyrion is fast, unpredictable, genuinely dangerous in a way none of the earlier grim encounters prepared them for. He's not a mindless beast to be cut down. He's a person, cunning and gleefully cruel, testing each of them in turn, with the specific patient malice of someone gathering intelligence, rather than simply trying to win. Twice he nearly lands a poison strike on Marrow before Clover's luck-charmed intervention saves him. Once Ruby's silver eyes flare bright enough to make even Tyrion flinch back, hissing, before he recovers and laughs it off as a party trick I've already seen, little Rose. It's Aerith, in the end, who ends the confrontation, not with an attack, but with something Tyrion doesn't expect at all. As he circles for another pass, tail raised, Aerith steps forward, staff planted, and rather than healing or retreating, she simply looks at him. Really looks. The way she looked at the training yard's cracked concrete, at Mantle's frozen streets, reading something beneath the surface that nobody else in the fight can perceive. "You're not doing this because you believe in her," she says, quiet enough that it cuts through even Tyrion's manic energy. "You're doing it because she's the only one who's ever made you feel like you mattered. That's not loyalty. That's just loneliness wearing a crown." For one full second, the first genuine pause in the entire fight, Tyrion's manic grin flickers, something raw and unguarded crossing his face before the madness slams back down over it like a shutter. "How dare you?" he hisses, and it's not delight in his voice anymore. It's something closer to fury, closer to a wound reopened. "You know nothing." But the pause has cost him, and Clover's luck-charmed line catches his tail mid-lunge, yanking him off balance long enough for Winter's glyph-anchored strike to send him sprawling, and rather than press the advantage, he simply laughs, high and brittle, and vanishes into the tree line before anyone can close the distance. "Tell your queen," Cloud calls after him, into the settling quiet. "We're not afraid of her." The only answer is Tyrion's fading manic laughter, swallowed by the dark tree line, and the sound of frost settling over a battlefield that everyone present understands, without needing to say it aloud, was never really about winning at all. "He wasn't there to defeat us," Winter says afterward, standing over the checkpoint's wreckage, voice tight with the particular controlled anger of a soldier who's just watched an enemy walk away on purpose. "He was there to learn what we can do." "And he did," Ironwood says grimly, arriving on the scene to survey the damage. Manageable this time, but not nothing. Which means Salem now knows exactly what she's dealing with. He turns to Cloud, expression heavy with something that isn't quite fear, but is close enough to it that Cloud recognizes it instantly. I need to ask you something, and I need you to understand why I'm asking it now, rather than before. Ask, Cloud says, whatever's coming next. And I think we both know something is, I don't think Atlas can face it alone. Not anymore. Not with Amity 3 days out. Not with Mantle's supply lines already under pressure. Not with Salem now personally aware of exactly what kind of power just landed in my kingdom. Ironwood meets his eyes, and for the first time since they arrived, there's no careful calculation behind the words. Just plain, exhausted honesty. I'm not asking you to be my weapon. I'm asking you, as one person to another, will you help us hold what's coming? Because I think it's coming faster than any of us are ready for. Cloud is quiet a long moment, thinking of Ruby's earnest, uncomplicated hope, of Robin's fierce, unglamorous devotion to a forgotten city, of Aerith healing strangers because it feels like home to give without being asked to prove she deserves to, of the particular ache of watching a world this fragile balance on the edge of something enormous. Yeah, he says finally, quiet but sure. We'll help. Not because you asked the right way, General, because I've seen enough of this world now to know it's worth fighting for on its own terms. He looks toward the tree line, where Tyrion's laughter has long since faded into silence. But whatever's coming, I don't think this was the real test. I think this was just her checking the lock before she tries the door. Above them, Atlas's distant towers catch the last light of evening, and far beneath the frost in the tree line, in places no map of Remnant has ever properly charted, something vast and patient and centuries hungry finishes its calculations and begins at last to move. Salem watches the recording of the southern checkpoint 3 times before she speaks. Tyrion brought it back himself, breathless with the particular manic pride of a man who has just delivered exactly what was asked of him, and Salem watches the footage in silence in the ruined throne room. She keeps more out of habit than necessity. Hazel standing at her shoulder, Watts fussing over a bank of monitors nearby, Tyrion himself practically vibrating on the edge of her attention, waiting for praise he isn't going to get. The swordsman moves like something trained to kill gods, she says finally, quiet, almost admiring. The healer reads the world the way I read it myself, down to its bones. And the other two, she watches Tifa shatter a Beowulf skull with a single strike, watches Barret's cannon arm fold a mutated alpha in half, are simply, uncomplicatedly strong, in a way this world hasn't produced organically in centuries. They're dangerous, Hazel says. They're interesting, Salem corrects, and there is something in her voice that Hazel has learned, across years of service, to be genuinely wary of. Not anger, not alarm, but the particular hungry curiosity of a queen who has spent centuries starved of anything new to consider. James Ironwood has been handed a gift he does not remotely understand the size of, and I find myself faced with a choice I haven't had to make in a very long time. She turns from the monitors, robes trailing across broken stone, and regards Tyrion with the flat, patient attention that has made grown men weep for mercy she has never once granted. You spoke to the healer, she says. She read something in you. Tell me exactly what she said. Tyrion's manic grin falters, just slightly, the wound from that moment still visible beneath the madness if you know to look for it. She said, he stops, jaw tight. She said, I don't believe in you, my queen. She said, I only follow you because you're the only one who's ever made me feel like I mattered. Salem is silent for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her red eyes. And was she wrong? Tyrion doesn't answer, and his silence answers for him.
Interesting, Salem says again, softer this time, and turns back to the monitors, to the frozen frame of Aerith's face mid-sentence, calm and steady, and utterly unafraid. A power that heals wounds of the body, and, apparently, wounds it was never asked to touch.
She's quiet a long moment, watching that frozen frame with something that might, on any other face, have been the faintest flicker of old, buried longing. No, I don't think I want to destroy this one outright. Not yet. I think I want to see what she does when the choice in front of her stops being easy. My queen? Watts ventures, uncertain. Amity launches in 3 days, Salem says, turning fully from the monitors at last, decision settling over her features like a mask sliding into place. Ironwood believes he's building a symbol of unity for this fractured world. I intend to make certain that symbol becomes something else entirely, a stage, for the entire kingdom to watch exactly what kind of choice his new allies are willing to make when the cost of helping him stops being simple. She looks to Hazel. Ready the assault. Not the hound alone this time. I want a true test, something that forces every one of them to reveal what they actually are, under pressure that isn't a training yard and isn't a border skirmish. Her red eyes gleam, cold and patient. Wake the wyvern beneath the northern ice shelf. It's slept long enough. Ironwood feels the shift 3 days before Amity's scheduled unveiling, in the particular way a commander learns to feel a storm before the first cloud appears on any instrument. A wrongness in the reports crossing his desk, security drills coming back with anomalies nobody can quite explain, a strange, creeping cold settling over Atlas's outer perimeter that his meteorologists insist isn't weather at all. Something's building, he tells the assembled council 2 days out, voice tight. I don't have proof yet, but every instinct I have is telling me Salem isn't finished testing us. And I think whatever's coming next, she's timed it for Amity's unveiling on purpose. Maximum visibility, maximum consequence if we fail. You want to delay the launch, Weiss says. Not quite a question. I want to, Ironwood admits. I can't. Delaying Amity now sends exactly the message of weakness Salem's counting on. Every kingdom watching this broadcast needs to see Atlas hold the line, or the fractures between us get worse, not better. He looks around the table, at Team RWBY, at Winter, at Cloud and the others seated near the back. So we prepare for the worst, and we hope it doesn't come. And if it does, his eyes find Cloud's. I'm asking you again, plainly. Will you stand with us when it does? We already told you yes, Cloud says. I know. I needed to hear it again anyway. Ironwood's exhausted half-smile is the closest thing to genuine warmth Cloud has seen from him yet. Some promises are worth asking for twice. The night before Amity's unveiling, Cloud finds Aerith alone on the guest suite's balcony, staring out at the floating city's lights with an expression he hasn't seen on her since the day their world started coming apart. You're doing the listening thing again, he says, settling beside her. I keep hearing something under everything, Aerith says quietly. Has been building for days now, like a held breath finally about to let go. She glances at him, and there's something fragile in her expression that catches at his chest. I'm scared, Cloud, not for me, for all of them. RWBY, Robin, everyone in Mantle who started to trust we're actually here to help. If something happens tomorrow and I can't save everyone who needs saving, you're not responsible for saving everyone, Cloud says, gentle but firm. You never were. Not back home, not here. I know that. Knowing it doesn't make it easier to feel. She's quiet a moment, watching the city lights. I keep thinking about what Salem's scout said, that I read something in him he didn't want read. I think that's what worries me most. Whatever's coming, I don't think it's going to be a fight I can simply heal my way through. I think it's going to ask something harder than that. Cloud doesn't have an answer for that. Not a real one. Not one that isn't just comfort dressed up as certainty. So he simply takes her hand, and they sit together in silence, watching the lights of a city neither of them chose, bracing for a storm neither of them can fully see yet, but both of them can feel, unmistakably, gathering just past the horizon. The morning of Amity's unveiling dawns clear and bitterly cold, the kind of sharp blue sky Atlas hasn't seen in weeks, and Ironwood stands at his office window watching it with the particular tight unease of a man who has learned, hard, not to trust a calm sky. "Reports?" he asks, not turning. "Nothing unusual," Winter says, though her voice carries the same wariness. "Security's tripled around the Colosseum. ASOP's on standby. Team RWBY positioned at the primary viewing platform. Our guests. Where are they?" "Already there, sir. Cloud asked to walk the perimeter himself this morning. Said he wanted to see the ground before anything happened on it." Ironwood allows himself a small, grim nod. Good instinct. Amity Colosseum hangs above Atlas like a second moon, gleaming white and gold. Crowds already gathering on viewing platforms across the city and in Mantle below. Broadcast feeds primed to carry the unveiling to every kingdom still capable of receiving a signal. A fragile, hopeful symbol of unity that Ironwood has poured months of his diminishing political capital into, and that Salem, everyone gathered quietly understands, intends to turn into something else entirely. Cloud walks the lower support scaffolding an hour before the ceremony, sword loose on his back, reading the structure the way he'd read any battlefield. Sightlines, choke points, places an attack could come from that Atlas's own security might not have fully considered. Tifa walks beside him, equally alert. Barret's stationed near the primary crowd platform, gun arm at rest but ready. Aerith stands near the medical staging area Ironwood insisted on setting up just in case, staff in hand, watching the gathering crowds with an expression that hasn't fully relaxed since last night. "Feel anything?" Cloud asks her, quiet, over the calm Winter issued them that morning. "Something's close," Aerith says. "Not here yet, but close. And it's big, Cloud. Bigger than anything we've felt since we landed." The ceremony begins on schedule. Ironwood takes the podium at Amity's central platform, voice carrying clear and steady across the broadcast feed. Speaking of unity, of kingdoms standing together against a darkness that has divided them for too long. And for 11 full minutes, it works. The crowd listens, the broadcast holds. Something in the air across both Atlas and Mantle lifts, just slightly, with the fragile hope of a world remembering what it might look like to stand together. Then the ice shelf to the north cracks open, and the wyvern rises. It comes up out of the frozen sea in a column of shattering ice and freezing spray, wings unfurling to a span that swallows half the northern sky, its roar rolling across Atlas like the sound of the world itself tearing. And unlike any grim the kingdom has faced before, it doesn't simply attack. It circles Amity Colosseum once, slow, deliberate, as if savoring the panic spreading through the crowd below, before diving straight toward the central platform where Ironwood still stands, exposed, mid-sentence. "Move!" Winter's voice cracks across every comm channel at once, and the ceremony dissolves into controlled chaos. ASOPs scrambling to cover Ironwood's retreat, Team RWBY already breaking from their positions, the crowd surging back from the platform's edges in a wave of screaming panic that security lines strain to hold. Cloud is moving before the wyvern's shadow fully crosses the platform, Buster Sword already off his back, and what follows is the single largest fight any of them have faced since the livestream spat them into this world. A battle that unfolds not in some isolated training yard or border checkpoint, but in full view of every camera broadcasting to every kingdom still listening, the entire world about to watch, in real time, exactly what these four strangers are willing to become when everything is on the line. The Wyvern's first pass shatters a support strut clean through, sending a section of the outer platform crashing down toward Mantle far below, and it's Tifa who reacts first, sprinting the platform's edge and catching the falling section's leading civilian evacuee barehanded, hauling 3 people back from the brink before the strut's remains crash into the void. "Cloud, it's too big for a straight fight," she shouts, over the roar of wind and screaming crowd. "We need to break its flight pattern before it makes another pass." "Working on it." Cloud's already sprinting the scaffolding's edge, timing the Wyvern's banking turn, and when it comes around for its second dive, he doesn't wait for it to reach the platform. He launches himself directly at it, sword raised, meeting 6 tons of ancient grim mid-air in an impact that sends a shockwave rippling across the entire Colosseum structure. He doesn't kill it, not with one strike. This isn't a mutated alpha. This is something built across centuries of accumulated hatred. Its hide thick enough to turn even the Buster Sword's edge, and Cloud's driven backward hard enough to crack clean through a support beam on landing. Breath punched out of him, one arm already going numb from the impact. "Cloud!" Aerith's voice, sharp with fear, already moving toward him despite Barret's shout to stay back. "I'm fine," Cloud gasps, already dragging himself upright. "It's tougher than anything we've hit yet. We need to work together, not separately." Barret's already providing the answer, gun arm roaring in a sustained barrage aimed at the Wyvern's exposed underside as it circles for a third pass, and RWBY's added her own fire alongside it. Crescent Rose's high-caliber rounds punching craters into scales that shrug off everything smaller. Weiss lays down a dust-anchored glyph field to slow its wing beats. Winter's own glyphs stack atop it, the 2 Schnee sisters working in tandem for the first time in months, their combined semblance work buying precious seconds. "It's still not enough," Clover shouts, watching the Wyvern shrug off the combined assault with barely a stagger. "We need something bigger." Aerith, watching from the medical staging platform, feels something shift in the energy she's been tracking since last night. Not just the Wyvern's raw, ancient hunger, but something underneath it. Something that has been building in this world for far longer than the creature itself has been awake. "Cloud!" she calls, voice cutting clear across the chaos. It's not just strong, it's drawing power from something. The whole area feels thin, like it's been feeding off something buried here for a long time. If we can disrupt whatever's feeding it. How? Aerith is already moving, staff raised, closing the distance toward the platform's exposed edge despite Cloud's shouted objection. And what she does next is something none of them, not Cloud, not Ironwood, not even Salem, watching through the hound's borrowed eyes from somewhere far below, fully anticipated. She plants her staff, closes her eyes, and rather than healing, rather than defending, she simply listens, deeper than she's ever listened on this world before, past the surface hunger of the Wyvern, past the thin, strained life energy of Atlas itself, down toward whatever ancient, buried thing has been quietly starving this world for centuries. And for one full, terrible second, her whole body goes rigid, eyes flying open, green light blazing from them like something vast has just looked back. "Aerith?" Cloud's voice cracks with something close to panic. "I see it," Aerith gasps, voice strange, layered, carrying something that isn't quite her own. "I see what's been feeding this whole world thin. I know how to fight it, but I need everyone, all of you, together, right now, or this doesn't work." Above them, the Wyvern banks for its final killing dive, straight toward the exposed, panicked crowd still trapped on the lower viewing platform, and there is no more time left to hesitate, to plan, to do anything but choose. "Do it," Cloud says, already moving to shield her. Whatever it is, do it now. What happens in the next 90 seconds becomes, in every account given afterward, by Ironwood, by Team RWBY, by every huntsman and Aesop's operative watching from the platform, by every citizen of Atlas and Mantle watching the broadcast feed with their hearts in their throats, the single hardest thing any of them will ever try to properly put into words. Aerith's green eyes blaze, and the light doesn't come from her materia this time, or not only from it. It comes from somewhere deeper, something she's been listening to since the first night they fell out of the sky. The thin, strained, dammed-up well of life energy she felt running under this whole broken, beautiful world. She doesn't fight the wyvern directly. She reaches past it, toward the thing feeding it, toward centuries of buried, starving hunger she recognizes, not because she's seen this exact darkness before, but because she's spent her whole life standing at the border between life and whatever waits on its other side, and she knows, with sudden, terrible clarity, exactly what kind of hunger this is. "It's not evil," she gasps, staff blazing, voice strained but clear. "It's starved. Something's been keeping this whole world thin on purpose. For so long it forgot how to be anything else. The wyvern's just the loudest symptom of it. Aerith, whatever you're doing, we need you to do it faster," Tifa shouts, hauling a fallen guard clear of falling debris. "I need help," Aerith says. "I can't hold this open alone." Cloud doesn't hesitate. He plants the Buster Sword point down beside her, closes his hand over hers on the staff, and for the first time since they fell into this world, pours everything he has, not into a strike, not into a killing blow, but into simply holding, steady and unshaking, so she doesn't have to hold it alone. Tifa reaches them a heartbeat later, one hand on Aerith's shoulder. Barret plants himself at their backs, gun arm raised not to fire but simply to shield, a wall between them and anything that might interrupt what's happening. And then, astonishingly, others join. RWBY doesn't think about it. She simply moves, closing the last few feet and adding her own hand to the growing circle, silver eyes wide with an instinct older than she fully understands. Winter follows, then Weiss, then, more slowly, more carefully, Ironwood himself, stepping past his own security detail's frantic objections to stand at the circle's edge, hand extended, choosing, deliberately, in front of every camera still broadcasting, to trust something he still doesn't fully understand, because the alternative is watching his kingdom fall and doing nothing. The light that blooms from that circle is unlike anything Remnant has produced in living memory. Not aura, not a semblance, not the old cold magic of the maidens, but something new, born from an entirely different world's understanding of life and connection, meeting Remnant's own thin, starving well for the very first time. It rises in a column of green-gold radiance that swallows the wyvern mid-dive, and the ancient creature doesn't die screaming. It simply, slowly, comes apart, like something exhausted finally allowed to rest, its immense form dissolving into drifting black motes that scatter and fade against the bright morning sky. Silence falls across Amity Colosseum, across Atlas, across Mantle far below, the particular ringing silence of a world that has just watched something impossible happen and is still catching up to believing it. Aerith sways, and this time it's not exhaustion alone that catches her. It's Cloud's arms, already there, already steady, holding her upright as the light fades and her breathing slowly evens out. "I'm okay," she murmurs before he can ask. "Just very tired. That was a lot." "You did it," he says, quiet, something in his chest loosening for the first time in what feels like days. Whatever that was, you did it. The broadcast feed somehow never cut out. Every kingdom that received Amity's signal that morning watched, in real time, 4 strangers and a fractured kingdom's huntsman and general join hands against something ancient and starving, and watched it fall not by force alone, but by something closer to a shared, chosen act of connection, a story that spreads faster and further than any of Ironwood's carefully planned Unity broadcasts ever could have managed on their own. In the ruins beneath what was once Ever After's border, Salem watches the recording in absolute silence, longer than Hazel has ever seen her sit with anything, and when she finally speaks, her voice carries something that isn't quite defeat, but is closer to it than anything Hazel has heard from her in all his years of service. "They didn't destroy it," she says softly. "They fed it, gave it what it's been starving for, instead of simply killing the hunger and calling it victory." She's quiet a long moment. "I have spent centuries teaching this world that strength means taking. It seems someone has just taught it, in a single morning, that strength can mean giving instead." She rises, robes trailing across broken stone, expression unreadable. "This changes the shape of things, Hazel. Not the ending, but the shape of everything between now and it." A pause. "Let them have this victory. I find, against my own long habit, that I am curious what they do with it." She does not order another attack that day. It is by any measure Hazel has ever witnessed the closest thing to a retreat Salem has permitted herself in longer than he can remember. 3 days later, in Ironwood's office, the mood is different than it has been at any point since the 4 strangers fell out of the sky. "Mantle's counsel reached out this morning," Ironwood says, setting down a data slate with something almost like a genuine smile. "They want to formalize a joint Atlas Mantle relief initiative. Robin Hill's already drafting the proposal. She specifically asked that it credit all 4 of you by name." "We didn't do it for credit," Barret says, though he doesn't sound displeased. "I know. That's rather the point of why it's working." Ironwood looks between the 4 of them, and something in his tired, weathered expression has genuinely, fundamentally shifted. "I owe you an apology, I think. When you first arrived, I spent a great deal of energy trying to work out whether you were a gift or a threat, as though those were the only 2 things you could possibly be. You were never either. You were just people, choosing, again and again, to be decent in a world that gave you every reason not to bother." He extends his hand, human this time, not the mechanical one. "Atlas is better for having you in it, however long that turns out to be." Cloud shakes it, and this time there's nothing guarded in the grip at all. "We're not sure how to get home," he admits. "Might be a long while before we figure that out. Might be never." "Then Atlas will make room for you as long as you need it," Ironwood says simply. "Not as assets, as people who chose this world when they didn't have to. That's not a debt I intend to forget." That evening, the 4 of them stand together on the guest suite's balcony, watching Atlas's lights bloom against the dark one tower at a time, Mantle's grimier glow visible far below, a floating city built on cracks that are, for the first time since they arrived, beginning, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely, to heal. "We're not home," Tifa says quietly, looking out at a skyline that will never quite feel familiar no matter how long they stay. "But this isn't nothing either." "No," Aerith agrees, leaning into Cloud's shoulder, exhaustion and something like contentment, both written plainly across her face. "It's not nothing at all." Barret, arms crossed, watching Mantle's distant lights with the particular fierce satisfaction of a man who has just watched a forgotten city start to matter to the people who'd forgotten it, allows himself, for once, something close to a genuine smile. "Guess we found ourselves another home worth fighting for," he says. "Didn't figure on that when we fell out of the damn sky." Cloud looks out at the lights, Atlas above, Mantle below, 2 halves of a fractured kingdom, slowly, painfully learning to see each other, and thinks of Ironwood's question, asked so carefully that first day. Are you a gift or a threat, or something this world simply hasn't got room to weigh yet? He knows the answer now, and it isn't any of the three. They're just people, a long way from a home that might not exist to return to anymore, choosing, freely, deliberately, one decision at a time, exactly what kind of story this turns out to be. And for the first time since the life stream tore the sky open above a burning reactor and spat them out into a world of frost and floating towers, that feels like more than enough.